I stood in the bedroom doorway, my hand trembling on the brass knob, staring at the empty bed. The silk sheets, the ones Richard had picked out himself, were perfectly made, untouched. 68 years old, worth somewhere north of $300 million, and he hadn't slept here in 2 weeks. I knew because I'd checked the security footage. Twice. That's when it hit me. The whole reason I'd signed those papers, the whole reason I'd walked down the aisle in front of 200 people while my mother lay in a hospital bed fighting stage 4 lymphoma, was sitting in a penthouse apartment across town with someone else's hand on his arm. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how a 29-year-old elementary school teacher ends up marrying a man old enough to be her grandfather. Let me tell you how desperation looks when it's dressed up in a 5-carat diamond ring. 3 months before the wedding, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment in suburban Denver with my mom. The place wasn't much. Beige walls, landlord approved everything. The kind of neighborhood where the most exciting thing that happened was the HOA meeting on the 3rd Thursday of every month. But it was ours, or at least it had been, until the medical bills started coming. Mom had been a nurse for 40 years. 40 years of double shifts, of coming home smelling like antiseptic and exhaustion, of working through every holiday so other families could be together. She'd done everything right. She had her pension, her modest 401k, her health insurance. None of it mattered when they told her the cancer was stage 4 and she'd need 6 months of aggressive chemotherapy. I remember the exact moment the hospital's billing department called. I was standing in the staff room at Lincoln Elementary, eating a sad desk lunch of leftover pasta, when my phone buzzed. The woman's voice was polite, efficient, merciless. "Your mother's current balance is $74,300, she said. "We'll need to discuss a payment plan." I'd set down my fork. $74,000. I made $42,000 a year teaching 3rd grade. My entire savings account had $11,000 in it, money I'd been squirreling away for a down payment on a house I'd never own. "Can we set up a payment plan?" I'd asked, already knowing the answer. "Of course, but the first payment of $5,000 is due by the end of the month." That was 8 weeks into her treatment, 8 weeks of watching my mother's hair fall out in clumps, of holding her head while she vomited into a plastic basin, of pretending everything would be fine while doing the math over and over, always arriving at the same impossible number. I'd worked 2 jobs that summer, elementary school by day, babysitting by night. I'd picked up weekend shifts at a coffee shop, had started selling stuff on Facebook Marketplace, my grandmother's jewelry, books I loved, my decent camera. I made $8,000 that summer and felt like a failure because it wasn't enough. Mom could see it on my face. She could always see everything on my face. One night in early September, after her 3rd round of chemo, she'd grabbed my hand with fingers that felt like bird bones and made me promise not to do anything desperate. "Promise me, Ashley," she'd said, her voice thin and papery. "Promise me you won't ruin your life trying to save mine." I'd promised. I'd meant it, too. I was going to figure something out. I'd take out student loans, apply for medical hardship programs, something. I wasn't going to throw away my future. Then Richard had walked into Lincoln Elementary on a Tuesday morning in October. He was there to donate $200,000 to the school's arts program. He was also the recently divorced father of one of my former students, a girl named Sophia who'd moved away in 2nd grade. He was tall for his age, distinguished looking, wearing a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. He had kind eyes. That's what I remember most. They were genuinely kind. The principal, Dr. Morrison, had walked him around the school. He'd stood in my classroom doorway while I was teaching fractions, and I'd felt his gaze like a weight. Not predatory, interested. Like he was actually watching me work, not just looking through me. After school, Dr. Morrison pulled me aside. "Mr. Harrington wanted to thank you personally for all you did for Sophia," she'd said. He's taking some of the teachers to dinner. You should come." I should have said no. I should have remembered my promise to Mom. Should have recognized the moment for what it was, a fork in the road, and one path led somewhere dark. But my mother had another round of chemo coming up, and the hospital had called again that morning about the outstanding balance, and Richard Harrington was standing in the lobby, looking at me like I was the most interesting thing he'd seen in years. So I went to dinner. He'd paid for the whole table, 6 of us, appetizers and wine, and steak I couldn't afford. He'd asked me questions about my teaching philosophy, about my family, about my dreams. No one had asked me about my dreams in months. When I'd mentioned, almost accidentally, that I was thinking about maybe getting my master's degree someday, he'd nodded thoughtfully and said, "You have the kind of mind that should be in a classroom. You're wasted on 3rd grade." It was a small thing. It shouldn't have mattered, but it did. We started having coffee, just talking. He'd ask about school, about Mom, about my life. He listened in a way that made me feel like I was the most important person in the room. He never asked for anything. He never even held my hand for the first month. Then, one November afternoon, he'd taken me to his office, a corner suite in downtown Denver with views of the mountains and the city sprawling below like a kingdom he owned. Which he basically did. Richard Harrington owned hotels, commercial real estate, a chunk of the telecommunications industry. "I want to help you," he'd said, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets. "With your mother's medical bills. I want to pay them." I'd stared at him. That's not possible. It's entirely possible. It's also entirely my choice." He turned to face me. "I have more money than I could spend in 10 lifetimes. Your mother is suffering. I can make that stop. Let me do this." "I can't let you do that," I'd said, but my voice had wavered. Because I could let him do it. I could absolutely let him do it. I could let him do it and my mother could get better and I could breathe again. Why not? That was the question that unraveled everything. Why not? What was I protecting? My pride? My independence? Some abstract notion of fairness in a world that had already proven itself deeply unfair to us? Because I'd started and then I'd stopped. Because I couldn't think of a good reason. Not one that mattered more than my mother's life. "Let me help," he'd said again, and it was so simple, so kind, that I'd believed the kindness was the whole story. I didn't know then about his second wife, the one he'd left with a non-disclosure agreement and $50 million in a quiet settlement. I didn't know about the prenuptial agreement I'd signed before the wedding, the one that essentially guaranteed I'd walk away with nothing if things went south. I didn't know about the way he'd start checking my phone, asking where I'd been, introducing me to his lawyers like I was a business acquisition. All I knew, standing in his office with the city glittering below us, was that my mother could live, and I would do anything for that. "Okay," I'd whispered. "Okay, yes, thank you." He'd smiled and pulled me into an embrace that felt like a cage closing. The proposal had come 3 weeks later. He hadn't asked. He'd simply opened a velvet box at dinner, the 4-star restaurant kind of dinner, the kind where they bring champagne before you even order, and said, "Marry me, Ashley." Not, "Will you marry me?" Just a statement, a directive, a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. I'd said yes. The wedding was scheduled for Valentine's Day. 150 guests, a country club, a dress that cost $8,000 that I'd wear once. My mother had cried when I showed her the photos. Happy tears, I'd told myself. Just happy tears because she was grateful, because the treatment was working, because her daughter was going to be taken care of. She'd grabbed my hand 2 days before the wedding, sitting in her chemo chair, hooked up to bags of poison meant to kill the cancer faster than it killed her. "Are you sure about this?" she'd asked. "Yes," I'd lied. Because you don't have to. I know, Mom, but I want to. She looked at me for a long moment, really looked at me, and I could see her trying to figure out if she believed me. She didn't, but she was too tired to push it. The cancer was winning that round. So I'd married Richard on Valentine's Day in front of 200 people, and my mother had watched from the front row in a wig because her hair hadn't grown back yet. And I'd promised to love and cherish a man I barely knew because he was paying for her to stay alive. The first week of marriage was fine. We stayed in a penthouse apartment in downtown Denver, his usual place because he had places everywhere. The view was obscene. You could see the entire front range of the Rocky Mountains from the bedroom window. He'd been gentle that first night. Surprisingly gentle, given everything. It wasn't pleasant exactly, but it wasn't horrible either. It was the kind of thing you do when you've made a deal with the devil and now you have to honor the contract. By the second week, things had started to feel different. He'd wanted to know where I was going if I left the apartment. He'd asked for the passwords to my email, my social media, my phone. For security, he'd said. You're a Harrington now. There are people who target wealthy families. I'd given him the passwords. What was the point of refusing? By the third week, I'd realized I had no friends anymore. He'd made that clear, not through rules, but through comments. When Jessica from school had texted about getting coffee, he'd asked why I was maintaining relationships with people who weren't in our circle. When my mom called, he'd been in the background, sighing, making comments about her being needy. And then, on the 23rd day of my marriage, I'd walked into the bedroom at 3 p.m. looking for my reading glasses, and I'd opened the door to find him in bed with someone else. No, not just someone, his assistant, a woman named Brittany who was 26 years old and had been working for him for exactly 4 months. The world had gone very quiet. That's what I remember. Like someone had hit the mute button on everything except the sound of my own heartbeat. Richard had looked at me from the pillows and hadn't even bothered to sit up. He'd just stared at me with those kind eyes that weren't kind at all, and he'd said, "You should knock." That's when I understood. I wasn't a wife. I was a possession, acquired, now being stored away while he continued his life exactly as it had always been. And that's when everything started to fall apart. I stood there in the doorway, my vision blurring, my chest so tight I couldn't breathe. Brittany pulled the sheet up to her chin. Richard didn't move. He just looked at me with that expression, casual, almost bored, like I'd walked in on him reading the newspaper, not sleeping with someone young enough to be his daughter. "Get out," I said. My voice didn't sound like mine. "Ashley, don't be dramatic." I walked out. I locked myself in the guest bedroom and sat on the edge of the bed for 3 hours without moving. My phone buzzed 12 times. Richard. Then his lawyer. Then Richard again. By midnight, I had a text that made everything clear. "You knew what this was. Read your prenup." I had read the prenup. My lawyer had read it too, using words like ironclad and predatory while shaking his head. Infidelity wasn't grounds for anything. I'd signed away my right to be angry, to be hurt, to be anything except grateful. The prenup was designed for exactly this scenario. A young wife who got ideas about loyalty and fairness. The next morning, I called my mother. She was home now, 3 months into remission, her hair growing back in soft gray wisps. She'd gained weight, color had returned to her face, and the doctor said she might actually make it. Richard's money had done that. Richard's money had saved her life. "Come stay with me," I said over the phone. "Pack a bag. I'm coming to get you." "Ashley, what's wrong? What happened?" "Just pack, Mom, please." She heard something in my voice. She didn't ask questions. I picked her up from the apartment we'd shared before the wedding. She was quiet in the car, watching my face, understanding that something had broken. When I told her what I'd found, she didn't cry or rage. She just reached over and squeezed my hand. We'll figure this out, she said. But I didn't see how. I had maybe $8,000 in a personal account, money I'd earned before the wedding. I had a car Richard had bought. I had the clothes in my closet and a wedding ring worth more than a house. I had nothing. That's when I got the call from my friend Jessica. She worked in HR at a different school district, and she'd been thinking about me since the wedding, worried about me, though she'd respected my distance. When I finally texted her for coffee, she'd picked up the phone immediately. "There's something you need to know," she said, "about Richard Harrington." She'd sent me a link to an article from 5 years ago. Woman claims harassment at Harrington Companies. The details were vague. Non-disclosure agreements kept people quiet, but the pattern was clear. 3 women, 3 settlements, 3 silences. Then Jessica sent me another link, and another. A Reddit thread where someone with the username Denver Truth had been compiling information about Richard for years. Screenshots of women who'd worked for him, a pattern of affairs, a pattern of control, a pattern of making problems disappear with money. "There's more," Jessica said. "I know someone, Sarah. She was engaged to him. It ended badly." Sarah agreed to meet me at a coffee shop on South Pearl Street. She was maybe 40, with tired eyes and a careful way of moving, like she was still protecting herself from something. We sat in the corner, away from other people. "He told me he wanted marriage," she said. "He told me I was special. He gave me a ring." Then I found out about the prenup, about the way he controlled money, about the women. When I asked him about it, he told me I was hysterical. He said if I left, he'd make sure I never worked in Denver again. "How did you get out?" I asked. "My brother is a lawyer, a good one." Richard backed down when he realized I had actual legal representation. But I had to sign an NDA. I can't talk about the details. I can't warn people. The agreement cost me $50,000 for every word I say publicly about what happened. I felt something cold settle in my chest. That's what the prenup was for. That's why Richard wasn't afraid. He'd built a system where the women he hurt couldn't speak, couldn't warn others, couldn't do anything but disappear. "I'm sorry," Sarah said. "I wish I could do more. I wish I could tell you everything." But she'd already told me the most important thing. I wasn't alone. And I wasn't the first. I went home and downloaded every document I could find. The Reddit threads, the news articles, the screenshots. Then I called a divorce attorney named Marcus Webb. He had an office in Cherry Creek, and he came highly recommended. When I told him about the prenup, he actually laughed. "This is beautiful in its ruthlessness," he said. "But it has a weakness. It's only enforceable if you sign it of sound mind, with full knowledge of what you're signing, and with independent legal representation. Did you have a lawyer review it before you signed?" "No, Richard said it was standard and then we have something to work with." Marcus was tall, African American, probably in his 50s, with the kind of confidence that comes from winning a lot of cases. He spread the prenup out on his desk and started marking it with a pen. "Here," he said, "you were under duress. Your mother was dying. He leveraged a medical emergency to get you to sign away your rights. That's not a valid contract. It's coercion. Can you prove that?" "I can try, but it'll be expensive and messy, and he'll fight like hell." "How expensive?" 50, maybe 75,000 to get started? I didn't have $75,000. I had 8,000 and a wedding ring. "What if I sell the ring?" I asked. Marcus looked at it, the 5 carats, the platinum band, the way it caught the light. "That's at least 40. Maybe 50 if you go to the right buyer. But, Ashley, you should know something. Once you do that, he'll know you're serious. He'll lawyer up. This becomes war." I thought about Brittany in his bed, about his casual indifference to my pain, about all the women before me and all the women who might come after. I thought about my mother, who'd asked me not to do anything desperate, and what it would cost her to watch me stay in this cage. "I'm ready for war," I said. I sold the ring to a diamond dealer in Lodo for $48,000. I cried while I did it, not for the ring, but for what it represented. The end of the story I'd told myself about Richard, about this marriage, about the price of saving someone's life. Then I filed for divorce. Richard's response came through his lawyers within 48 hours. A cease and desist letter. A threat of legal action if I continued to defame him by telling anyone about the marriage. A reminder that I'd signed an NDA as part of the prenup, and any public statements about our relationship would cost me $5 million in damages. $5 million. The number was so absurd, so clearly designed to silence me through terror, that I almost laughed. But I didn't post anything. I didn't call the media. I just kept working with Marcus. What happened next took 6 months. 6 months of depositions, where I had to recount every humiliation. 6 months of Richard's lawyers trying to paint me as a gold digger, a liar, someone who'd married him for money and now wanted more. 6 months of my phone blowing up with texts from Richard, from his lawyers, from his assistant asking me to come back, that he'd made a mistake, that he loved me. Then, 3 weeks before the trial date, something shifted. A woman named Melissa came forward. She'd worked as a housekeeper in one of Richard's properties. She'd found something in his office, a flash drive, while cleaning. On it were emails, dozens of them. Richard coordinating with his lawyers about how to handle various women. Names, amounts, details about affairs, about control, about settlements designed to keep women quiet. Melissa didn't have an NDA. She wasn't bound by silence. She gave the flash drive to a journalist at the Denver Post. The story broke on a Tuesday morning. Billionaire's pattern of control and infidelity inside Richard Harrington's predatory marriage machine. The article named names. It included emails where Richard discussed me specifically. The teacher situation, he called it. It detailed a pattern going back 20 years. By Wednesday, the hashtag Harrington Wives was trending in Colorado. By Thursday, 4 more women had come forward. They had different stories, but the same pattern. Control, money, silence, humiliation. The prenups were all worded the same way. The NDAs were all designed to cost more than they were worth to violate. Richard's lawyers filed an emergency injunction against the journalist. It didn't work. The First Amendment doesn't protect billionaires who prey on women. The trial never happened. Richard's lawyers called Marcus on a Friday afternoon. They wanted to settle. Not the prenup settlement, something real, something that would make the problem go away. I sat in Marcus's office while he negotiated on the phone. Richard wanted $3 million. Marcus countered with 8. They settled on $5.2 million. When Marcus hung up, he looked at me. "You're going to be a wealthy woman," he said. "What will you do with it?" I thought about that question for a long time. I thought about my mother, about the elementary school where I'd taught, about Richard sitting in his penthouse with Brittany, thinking he'd bought his way out of consequences. "I want to set up a fund," I said, "for women leaving abusive relationships. Legal fund, emergency housing, whatever they need to get out." Marcus smiled. "I know someone at the Community Foundation. I'll make the introduction." The settlement agreement came with one stipulation. I couldn't talk about the details. Richard's lawyers wanted that clause. I refused. "No," I told Marcus. "I'm not signing another NDA. I'm not staying silent. That's the whole reason this happened. All of us staying silent." Marcus went back to Richard's team. There was a standoff for 3 days. Then, Richard's lead lawyer called personally. "Your client is going to destroy his reputation," she said. "Your client already destroyed his reputation," Marcus replied. "Now the question is whether he pays for it or not." Richard paid. 2 weeks later, I walked out of the courthouse with a settlement that didn't come with a price tag for speaking the truth. The press was waiting. I prepared a statement with Marcus, something that was factual, powerful, and wouldn't give Richard's lawyers any ammunition for appeal. "I married Richard Harrington believing he was a good man who wanted to help my mother," I said into the cameras. I was wrong. What I learned is that he uses money as a tool of control. He uses wealth to silence women. I'm speaking publicly today to tell any woman in a similar situation that you're not alone, that there are lawyers and advocates who will help you, and that your voice matters more than his money. Then I turned and walked away. The story went national. CNN picked it up. The Today Show called asking for an interview. I did 3 interviews and then stopped. Not because I was scared, but because I'd said what I needed to say, and anything more would start to feel like I was profiting from the story rather than surviving it. What surprised me most was the emails. Women wrote to me, dozens of them, hundreds. They told me about their own Richards, men who'd controlled them, men who'd used money as a weapon, men who'd made them feel small. Some of them were still trapped. Some had escaped. All of them were grateful to know they weren't crazy. I worked with Marcus to set up the foundation. We called it Second Wind. The first $500,000 came from my settlement. We helped 43 women in the first year. By the 3rd year, we'd helped over 300. My mother came to the ribbon cutting ceremony for our first safe house. She'd made a full recovery. Her hair had grown back. She was working part-time as a consultant, helping other cancer survivors navigate the medical system. She stood next to me as we cut the ribbon, and she squeezed my hand. "I'm proud of you," she said. "I was always proud of you, but I'm especially proud of you now." 2 years after the divorce was finalized, I ran into someone at a coffee shop, a woman with kind eyes and a gentle voice. Her name was Jennifer, and she was a pediatrician. We talked for an hour. Then we got coffee again. Then dinner. Then one night she kissed me, and I realized something I'd been too numb to understand before. I didn't want to be married to a man. I didn't want to be married at all. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I wanted this. Someone who saw me. Someone who didn't try to own me. Someone who believed I was enough exactly as I was. Richard married Brittany 6 months after our divorce was finalized. The wedding was small, private. I saw the photos on social media. She looked happy. I hoped it lasted. I hoped he'd changed. I knew he probably hadn't. But it didn't matter anymore. He was no longer my problem. What I learned from all of this, what I'd tell anyone going through something similar, is that desperation makes us vulnerable. When we're scared, when we're desperate, when someone offers us a way out, we don't ask the hard questions. We just grab the lifeline. But the lifeline can be a noose if we're not careful. My mother's life was worth saving. That part wasn't wrong. What was wrong was thinking there was only one way to save it, that Richard was the only option, that the price I'd have to pay wouldn't be too high. There are always other options. There are always other people. The trick is learning to recognize the difference between a lifeline and a trap. I'm not ashamed of what I did. I'm not sorry I married him. I'm only sorry it took me 3 weeks to find the courage to leave. But I left, and that changed everything.